and it's just not efficient to train that way.
I think this guy has a problem of fighting too instinctually, but I think everybody else that we saw does as well. Like
Yeah,
even the guy who was
they
better.
nobody felt like they were controlling anything on the three videos that we're
Yeah,
watching. So
yeah.
it felt like the outcome could have just been a coin flip. That if our outcomes are coin flips, it's really hard for us to like work to things on getting better.
Like I feel that this is a person who's maybe been training for a few years, who's learned, some positioning, some footwork, some parries, some posts and stuff, and now is the time where he is like, synthesizing all of that into an actual game that needs to be played. And I feel like he may be on the cusp of that.
Chess is fun when people can when you know what the moves are and like you know how the pieces move, and you're even if you're not good at it, you're trying to like form like rudimentary ideas. Like that's fun. I'm like
Hmm.
playing against those ideas is fun. What isn't fun is like if we all just move pieces at random and
Right,
like we're not really making any adjustments and things are just happening. That's
right.
not very fun. What the? This little guy.
So let me see. So we have three videos. Well, okay, we'll go ahead and begin. So what's going on, guys? False Edge here once again. So today's something a little bit fun. I had a guy approach me about reviewing some longsword footage that he has, and like, yeah, I fence longsword. I enjoy longsword, but I don't really feel like I know all that much about longsword. So I thought that I would go like the extra mile for this person and bring in somebody who knows a fair bit more than I do. Uh, Brandon, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do?
Yeah, my name's Brandon Phan. I'm the head instructor at Dallas School of Historical Fencing. I've been fencing for about 7 years under the KDF system. Primarily, we focus on the early KDF, namely for myself, MS 3227A as like the main manuscript that I work from. But generally, our club has evolved into being enveloped by like the entirety of the KDF catalog, from Lichtenauer to Meyer and everything in between. But yeah,
Right on, right on. Okay. All right. So when this guy approached me about these videos, I asked him to send me some specific things, being like, I want to see a match against somebody that you are better than, and I want to see a match against somebody that is better than you, right? And I do this because I want to see like the actions that he's making, like in different contexts. And so we have that here. He also sent a third video of somebody who he describes is like equal to him, and so I don't know. I'm really excited. I think this is going to be fun. Uh, you have any word on which one we should start with, Brandon?
we can just do the one where about they're at the same level
Okay.
as just a baseline. Yeah.
Okay. Cool. So why don't we begin? And so this guy is the one with the white socks in black.
Gotcha. On the right. Gotcha.
Okay, another hand snipe there, a bit obscured. I mean, I've definitely seen far worse from other people before, so this isn't bad.
Well, if you want
Hmm.
to go ahead and pause it, we could
Sure.
probably make some notes on the exchanges that happened
Sure.
so far.
Yeah.
Sweet. So I'll kind of go ahead and I guess do maybe if you're a fair amount of observations that I'm making more so about his fencing than his opponent's fencing, since that's what we're looking at.
Hmm.
The biggest thing whenever I'm looking at people's fencing footage that I look out for, um, as Josh, as you know, because we've done footage review before, is I'm generally looking for what type of like movement patterns and habits that I'm seeing constantly being made throughout the exchanges, and realistically, like, are we making adaptations throughout the bout based off of like the observations that are in front of us? So with that being said, I think some of the observations that we can put against this individual is are a few pretty consistent ones that aren't either good or bad, but I did want to make note of them because I think that if we look at a higher level opposition that he faces, I'm curious if this is a thing that gets taken advantage
Mm-hmm.
of, or if it changes in time. The first few exchanges, where it seems to be, at least the way that I perceive his fencing, is that he likes to fence with a dominant foot forward, with his point relatively in presence. If we look at the first and second exchange, those exchanges ended in striations from the Zufectin, so false edge cuts to the hand, which I think were pretty well placed. But as we look at the continuation of the rest of the exchanges, something I do want to make note of is his tendency to keep his hands relatively low while keeping his point up high, especially when he's looking at making defensive parrying actions or taking actions. Even as you can see now, as you're replaying the video, as he's going on his back foot, we see him almost as if he's going into like a vom tog, where his point is up high on the roof, or like a cron. His hand is still like at navel height.
Mm-hmm.
I think that this is potentially an issue that we could see. At least something that I would make note of is structurally, it's not that great of a position. It's a position where someone can very easily blow through like that triangle, as far as like a pretty forceful action if they're moving forward. And inversely, it's making it pretty hard for him to find riposting actions, just because his blade is, in my opinion, in a much more awkward position than it can be for resending attacks. Kind of other observations we can make note of on top of that is his footwork. Right? I think his footwork is relatively decent. I think that he's moving pretty well. I do think that sometimes he's getting a little bit too close as far as when he's launching his attacks. He's kind of weak, what we call weakening as he's getting close, which oftentimes would translate into an opportunity for us to get stabbed, especially given the
Mm-hmm.
position that he's holding his blade as he's advancing. I would probably say that I would want to be very wary of somebody just re-extending that point with an upsets style action or calling his movement. And then if we're getting maybe a bit more nitpicky, he does seem to be going for some type of like flunging or flushing action. It's not really flushing, but he's
Yeah.
moving forward. There's been a few times where he's landing a little weird on his dominant leg with his like foot off to the side. Um, Maybe a
Yeah.
smaller nitpick, but I would say that if the exchange isn't ending on that initial first intention that he's sending that action on, he's leaving himself in definitely not the most optimal position to continue throwing actions with his hands. But just something to keep note of. I'd be curious to see, as you can see now, his hands are so low. If somebody is, sending what we call a sheath and a strong action, like down the center line, I would find it very difficult for this guy to probably withhold his defensive actions. And given that he's relatively consistent on where his hands are being placed as he's being offended against, I feel like this is also an opportunity where somebody can be really tricky with their feinting actions, and kind of capitalize on the fact that they can hone on where his hands are going to be, whether that's going to be a hit to the hands as a tag hit, or I think what we end up seeing in one of the exchanges is a cut to the leg done, kind of knowing that this
Yes.
guy isn't settling his movement too much.
Right. Yeah, I think that those are really some good observations. And for me, the biggest thing that like stood out was some of this footwork. It's certainly like not the worst that I've seen, but it definitely like I think has room to be improved. Like I think right there, like we're seeing more of a hopping motion than we are like an actual stepping motion. And
Mhm.
this is just obviously like a bad habit. So
Yeah,
I
and
mean,
especially if you look at, especially when you look at the extension as he's going forward to extend his swords and his legs, we can kind of just keep note of where his hands are. Like, I mean, they're not even high enough to protect against a counter thrust. Like his cross guard isn't high enough if his opponent extends. Which
mhm.
generally speaking, longsword sometimes has a reputation of being a weapon that can cause a lot of injuries. These cuts around the head, these warehouse stuff like that. But I mean, I think we can speak for many people. Running into a thrust is one of the worst things that can happen. So
Right.
when we say things like moving sword first, that isn't just like a question of being effective and efficient in our offense, but oftentimes it's a discussion of like we want to move first so that we're not like getting skewered when we're trying to attack.
Mm-hmm.
And this is probably an example of, as we get to somebody who is maybe a bit higher skill level, this could be more often or more frequent, or definitely an opportunity for that to happen. So that'd be one of the first things I'd probably want to point out.
Okay, sure. Okay, so we'll continue. I'll just choose a
Mhm.
random spot here. I think this is where we were. Oh, that was interesting. I'd like to see the placement of that shield how there, or attempted shield how. Ah, I went too far. Looked like he may have landed that, but I think
It
that was
looked like
good.
a double. Yeah, it looked like they both made contact.
That was great. That was great.
Yeah.
I don't think his opponent called that one, but I think that was a good one. I think that was the best pass I've seen.
Oh man. I'm gonna end, if you don't mind pausing it real quick. One thing that I think as the exchanges are developing and we're seeing more action from fencer on the left, that I want to make note of is the fencer on the right, or this person in question. I find that they're taking actions or the positions in which they're trying to parry their opponent's blade to be extremely chaotic. Generally speaking, we would like to have a similar base that we're fencing from, whether it's like platforms as we're attacking within the Veer League or the different guards or whatever guard in the system that you use. But generally, one thing that I like to look towards is when we're fencing, these guards can be proliferated as defensive actions as well, right? So if somebody's cutting at me, I can choose to like extend my blade towards a threat, and I can take that threat in long point. Or inversely, if somebody's attacking me and I need to shell up like a Garda Versetsen or like a Taken Tog or Taken Kron, whatever you want to call it, oftentimes I find that when he is being threatened, his way of extending or retracting to defend against the threat is maybe a bit less efficient than we'd like to see. It seems a
Mm-hmm.
bit out of home base. It seems a little awkward as far as his ability to carry out like relatively meaningful offense from it, or what I mean by meaningful is like efficient, quick, automatic offense from it. And especially when we look at the idea of fencer on the left throwing in multiple intentions or multiple actions, or whether that's feints or committing cuts, we can almost immediately see our fencer on the right has a pretty hard time consolidating his defensive actions.
Right.
We did see a pass earlier that was great where he did a hit on prep and then a nice taker afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
I'm of the strong belief that the hard part of fencing is not getting hit, the easy part is hitting people. And so far, I think that that shows that every time that, not every time, but the majority of the time that we see our fencer getting threatened, I'm not seeing nearly the amount of confidence in his ability to defend and take the action and then work off the taker appropriately, as he is of like sending offensive actions.
Mm-hmm.
So that'd be something that I would definitely think that is a place for opportunity, right? Is working on quick, structured, efficient parries that give you essentially free hits afterwards, or punishes is something you can call it. Make your fencing easier for yourself, because right now it seems to be, especially combined with the footwork, it's a little bit all over the place. It's really hard to
Mm-hmm.
pin down, which inevitably means that I think against a higher level opponent, that's just so much play that we're giving them. I mean, we're telling each other so much when, if I'm getting attacked and I start like kind of having a really hard time keeping up with the offense, whether I'm not backing out a measure, or I'm kind of showing that I'm having to like move my blade within that white noise in a really chaotic way. I mean, how many times have we been in a tournament and we see that happen, and then we can
Mm-hmm.
kind of make an assumption off of their fencing almost immediately. Like, I know what I need to do in this type of belt.
Right.
And this is one of those situations where I think if we saw this in a tournament setting, it would be kind of a similar, thing that we think about too.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Um, I do want to say, like, sort of going along with that, like some words of encouragement. I think that this spot, right, this stage in his fencing that he's in, though, is emblematic of somebody who is actively learning, though, right? Like this is a challenge for somebody like who is already like on their way. Like this isn't something that we would tell a person who's brand new. Like this person is obviously very like clearly like learning and understanding, and like um he just needs more of that. It's just more time. You know what I mean? I just think he needs more time. But it's
Yeah,
clear. It's clear
absolutely.
that he's. I think he's moving in the right direction. He just needs more of those repetitions to build like that confidence over time. Um,
hmm And we see this a lot in intermediate fencing in general, where like, we build confidence within a certain like set of actions that we do. Oftentimes, those actions are things that we practice in the club or things that we practice at home. Oftentimes, the easiest things to practice is offense, right? I can cut a lapel. I
hmm
can do cutting drills against a partner at my training facility. But working on taking actions and defending, it's a lot less glamorous. It's a lot less
Yeah.
fun, oftentimes, for a lot of people. In the same way that doing footwork can be a lot less fun or engaging for a lot of people. But oftentimes, I mean, it is when we look at like the pecking order of how do we get good at fencing, controllability, and the ability to be consistent and kind of like carve a path out for the bout itself, or whether it's like carve a path for how you funnel people into your own skill set in game, or how do I like carve a path for my opposition and what they can and can't do. A lot of that is like a question of what am I saying no to? Like what am I taking away from? How am I moving away from them? How am I moving their blade away from them or away from me? And that's like a much harder thing to work towards.
Yeah.
So I think you're right. Like the type of fence that I'm seeing is like pretty staunchly something that I would say is like it's not beginner by any means. They definitely have like a level of comfort in a lot of the actions that they're doing, and you can definitely tell when they're comfortable. Like we were talking about before, when
hmm
he's moving forward, it feels like he has much more confidence in the actions, whether it's his blade work or his ability to move forward. But when he's moving backwards, we kind of see like a diversion from that confidence, and that proliferates in the type of movements that he does and defaults to. And that's really solvable. That's just repetition, and
Yeah.
that's just doing it more.
hmm
Mhm.
Hello.
Oh,
What's up, Levi?
speaking of after the the cameo from Levi, let's go
Mhm.
ahead and find another exchange. We'll skip a bit forward here, just um, for time's sake. Oh, there's no sound. Let's go back. Bit of a double.
Yeah, and see, we don't maybe
Uh,
have to pause it, but
yeah,
like I was saying before, we can, if we get the sense that our opponent is attacking at us, it's okay to parry. Like it's okay to just take the
right.
sword and then work from it afterwards. And in this instance, when we're not doing that, it's we're losing opportunities for sure.
hmm
Do you mind going back on that exchange?
Sure, sure. I'm not sure how far back that is, but
Gotcha.
that one.
And this is another example too, yeah, where this is going back to the idea of like we need to find consistent, efficient pairing positions, right? Like that cross guard needs to be active. I know that we're trying to defend like our right side at that moment, but things to consider is just maybe tightening up on some of those default positions that we go to, because he's getting clipped on the hands here as he should be,
hmm
because his sword's not really in a position to actually defend against much if he's going for that lower line, which it feels like he reads that measure pretty well, or he reads the threat. He understands that he is working to close off that right line, or that maybe upper right, upper lower right of the beer blossom, but he's not maybe finding the turn of the cross that gives him that defensive action or rewards him for his read.
hmm
So small mechanical adjustments, right idea, just wrong adjustment.
Right. And I actually think that this is like a lot of the like the hard part about fencing, right? Because you could like technically be making like the correct decision in that moment, but like if you're off by inches, like you lose. It doesn't matter, the decision that you've made. So I think
Right, for sure.
you're right. I like with the footwork that we've seen, and with some of these parry positions, like really just tightening up screws would I think go a long way for this person. Um, oh, fucking God. I'm such a noob with this program, bro. People walking in front of the camera. Classic HEMA. Love it.
Mhm.
How quaint.
Oh, he told him to get out of the way.
Get the fuck out.
That exchange, go ahead and pause it if you don't mind. Um, just to make a note and a quick note is again that exchange for me is the realization of maybe some of the things that I was mentioning earlier. This idea that he is attacking into the line off of his Vorschlag, his initiative action, but he's not maybe adequately moving his hands in a way that defends against the re-extension. So we find him in this case, getting thrusted, and luckily it was a pretty polite thrust where his opponent wasn't moving forward. But I mean, again, habitually, this doesn't seem to be maybe the most effective way we can be moving as far as avoiding just getting hit, right? Even though he's the one that's maybe pressing the action. As we press that action, we always want to do so with the security of, being behind our blade and our blade defending us. In this case, he not only cross cuts to his opponent's right line, his left line, which generally speaking, if we're fighting a ready fencer and they're working actions against us, that's already pretty difficult to capture the blade. I generally don't think it's maybe the most effective way to do it, but that's besides the point. I think that what did end up happening was his opponent reads that as he's being threatened, he decides to re-extend his sword and thrust, and we can kind of see here they're both getting hit. So
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to think that obviously this is very avoidable, but for me this is just a realization of kind of those critiques earlier. We're not maybe moving our hands quite in time as we should be, regardless of the decision making and where the hit is coming from, and it kind of is allowing our opponent to get hits on us, even though we're the ones who are kind of making that qualitative change by taking that initiative
Mm-hmm.
action.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good, good, great. I think that's all great. Let's go ahead and move on to one of the next videos. We're sitting at around 20
Sure.
minutes here.
Hmm.
Also, just before we move on, though, I'm not sure if you can see, quality wise. I like this guy's shin guards. They have like this
Oh,
hex,
yeah,
hexagonal
the very angular.
pattern. It's interesting. Okay, so we have a choice. We have better than him, or he's better than the other person. What are we thinking?
Let's do the one where the person is better than him.
All right. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. This one is against Phan. Uh, Not too bad. I think we're seeing better fencing in this video.
We're seeing, I think, more like a more reliable platform for him to work off of.
Hmm.
Do you mind backing up in exchange?
Sure.
We'll kind of just make note. Let's watch. I believe it'll be this one. Oh, one before this one. This one. Yeah. So if we can slow that exchange down, because it is going to go to a prior observation that I had, which was when he is moving forward and extending his actions, his hands are generally either too low on entry. In this case, they weren't too low, or he's finding himself in a position where he's weakening his position when he is in striking distance. What we're seeing here is probably an example of that as he attempts to go for that initial Vorschlag. I find that, especially against a taller opponent like the person that he's fighting, we have to be very, very careful about where we're positioning or resetting our actions to. In this case, we find that as he starts lowering, or even as he starts kind of giving up on the offensive assault, he's giving his opponent a tempo to work off of. In this case, I see like a Shior or Kronhau. from the action.
Mm-hmm.
Like so, and so that's just something to keep note of. Again, as like a habit that he may have, which is where how are we resetting? How are we comporting ourselves as we're fencing? Are we weakening when we're too close? Which in this case, are we you know, are we not addressing the threat of the blade as we're in striking distance? And that seems to be something that he does consistently.
Mm-hmm.
But I do agree with your earlier observation. It seems like his fencing is a little bit more active, a little bit more dynamic. There's obviously much a higher volume of like blade exchanges happening when they are in striking distance, which isn't necessarily always a good thing, isn't necessarily always a bad thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think it's a different type of fencing that we're seeing, and this could be because maybe um, he is more used to fencing somebody of the skill set, maybe somebody who's
Mm-hmm.
actively like parrying his initial actions is giving him more options to work off the second and third. So like parry riposte style fencing is being accessed more because it felt like in the previous one we were seeing much more single tempo exchanges where they're
Yeah.
both throwing off their singular action and it landing. And that's oftentimes because at least in as we are kind of talking about before, you know, they're both not really working the takes too much. They're both really looking to find those hitters. So they don't have to go past the parry riposte. In this case, it seems like that's being accessed more. Somebody is taking the blade more, and it might be left,
Right.
it might be right.
For sure. And I really think that, you know, because I'm seeing, I think a higher level of fencing from this person here. I think it's really like emblematic of the stage of like an intermediate fencer, because I've had this like in my own fencing as well, where I just fence better against people who fence better, right? Um, and I think that's really emblematic of just like an intermediate stage fencer, and that's a good thing, and he should continue to do this, because
Yeah,
that's
for sure.
ultimately what's going to make him better. Um,
Mhm.
so we will continue. I think we.
I'd watch edge alignment on those right squares. It's pretty common, but it
Hmm.
seemed that oftentimes he's throwing them, they're pretty flat.
Sky's fencing is pretty fast. There's
Hmm.
some fast cuts. That was great.
If we'll go back like two exchanges if you don't mind, and
Sure.
it's going to be something else that we can make a note of. It was that Zufectin exchange where he's extending in long point and he's kind of moving his blade around, right around. Yeah, can you go back to the start of that exchange?
Sure.
So the big thing I want to make note of is how is he addressing the threat of his opponent's blade? I think that obviously he did a really great job at finding where the threat was true, finding a hanging parry and cutting around. But one thing I'd really want to make note of is optically when I'm seeing this idea of the threat being like we're being marched upon and somebody is starting to threaten us. How is that opponent moving their blade in response? I
Hmm.
would like ideally for us to maybe find a bit more of a consistent decision action as far as how we're moving against a threat, whether we're pointing at their opponent's sword. I think the movements are a little bit wide, and I think that those wide movements will allow for really, really concise blade work from the opponent to close in, or at the very least, like it's giving a bit too much information on where we're leaving ourselves open. Um, Generally speaking, right, if someone is feinting against us, we of course we want to chase after the threat, but we don't want to chase so much so that we're opening ourselves up. I think that
Right.
given the type of fencing that we're seeing, where everything is really focused on the close and going to Krieg, we didn't get punished on it here. But we both fence so many people who have excellent like tag hitting games, like cuts to the hands, effect install games. This would have been like a great opportunity for Fencer on the left to capitalize and engage in something like that because our Fencer that we're watching is being so reactive in a
Hmm.
way that is presenting so many opportunities and angles to be hit on the hands as he's moving his hands like around to address this threat. But of course, it didn't happen here. So kudos to the defensive read and getting the hanging parry. But it's just something to look out for
Hmm.
as well, especially as he continues developing.
For sure. And, so just sort of springboarding off of that, a concept that I talk to my guys a lot about is like, this difference between like reactive defense and like proactive defense, where like we don't necessarily want to be too reactive to what our opponent is doing, but rather defending in a way to where we are limiting their potential actions. And so, like,
Mhm.
I think what I'm seeing, like in this case here, in that specific pass, is being more reactively defensive and chasing a blade that could have, like, put him in a position to where he could have been cut, rather
Mhm.
than positioning himself to where he's narrowing his opponent's like options, if that
Mhm.
makes sense.
Yeah, for sure.
um and so, yeah, good exchange though. I mean, I think it worked out for him. It was certainly very pretty, uh
Mhm.
but definitely something to look out for.
Same type of thing, weakening when he gets to the second intention.
Yeah.
He seems to have like when the structural issues are coming up, and this happened with the first fencer as well. When they're pressing actions, like bringing him short, his positions aren't really that helpful for him as far as being able to defend against them.
A lot of Zver copters going on here.
Hmm. Well, it's one
Yeah.
more exchange and we'll pause it. Cool. Okay, so we just watched quite a few exchanges.
Hmm.
A lot of exchanges happen in that amount of time. And my major observation from both fencers, realistically, is maybe there's not a lot of adapting going on. Like
Hmm.
maybe there's not a lot of changing and watching what's happening in the bout that's going on. You made the observation, a lot of Twercopters,
Yeah.
a lot of closing actions, a lot of like let's cut out and Krieg actions. But I find myself watching these exchanges and thinking that the type of decisions that we're seeing are constant. Like when someone is being threatened, we're oftentimes seeing like a very specific or consistent type of reaction. As someone is trying to take the blade, if they do happen to try to attempt to take the blade, it's a very consistent movement pattern that they're going for. And oftentimes, I'm not seeing any adjustments against those. I think that's why we saw like maybe six, seven different exchanges get blitzed out in the span of like a minute or so.
Hmm.
One thing that I think is extremely important, whether it's in your tournament sparring or your casual club sparring, is oftentimes our ability to see how we got hit or how we hit somebody and then make those calculations and adjustments moving forward is what makes us better, right? On the long term, obviously, making changes to our movement patterns and improving them is how we get better. But even on the short term, we need to be able to see tactically what is my opponent doing, how am I reacting against these actions, and then the next part is, do I know what the answer ought to be to that thing? And then maybe can I do that answer the next time that we see that happen? I think that just as a general observation for the exchanges happening, there's a lot of actions that are happening all the time. And
Hmm.
oftentimes it seems to be resulting in doubles. I want to go back to my previous observation, which is, it's our fencer has a much easier time throwing those offensive series and assaulting. I think that his ability to maybe work his taker actions is a bit less consistent. I would totally love to see just that objective change to it's okay to be really stingy with the opportunities that I'm presenting. You know,
Mm-hmm.
even these positions like there, the type of take that he goes for is one that is very obviously setting up like his Twitter, which is fine, but
Mm-hmm.
he's already been hit on the head quite a few times from through those actions because his opponent is a little bit taller. He's not able to make the adjustment against, the attributes of his opposition. Here, same thing, weakening in Krieg, working a second intention, or working doubles. Like we can choose to be the person that says, I'm going to secure myself in my closing action by making sure that before I attack, it's safe to do so. And often that translates to you either need to program your opponent really well to move their blade out of the way, or we need to take the sword.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Another thought that I had sort of while you were going into that was, I remember a piece of advice that you gave me, some time ago, which was, you would like me to work on my ability to say no. And I think what that means is to say no to like myself, right? Like you don't always have to be cutting, you don't always have to throw a riposte. Like oftentimes it can be really beneficial for you to just be the patient person and to wait the other person out and to make sure that you've made like a strong parry or you've reached a strong position before you then go like into your cut, right? And
Mm,
like I think that like this person may like benefit from that in playing a little bit slower of a game, working on that defense and working on like that decision making and choosing like when to make your cutting action like at an appropriate time instead of just trying to be faster, instead of just trying to, powerhouse your way through it or to be faster than the other person.
right.
Um,
And yeah, saying no for is also a big part. Like you said, it's about not. It's trying to proactively not be on autopilot, right? Like it's look
mhm,
at the thing in front of you, and like consciously be like. When I usually say no to my guys, it's like it's an essence of it's okay to if you don't like what you see developing within the exchange, you don't have to play ball. If my opponent is cutting at me and I know that they're someone who likes to throw follow ups, whether they're warehouse or second, third, fourth intentions, whatever it may be, fainting consistently, it's okay to say, I don't really want to deal with it. I'm just going to use my feet to back up from that threat and then I can reset the position.
mhm,
It's okay to say that if somebody is working like an action towards me, that I don't have to engage my blade into like a parry or pause situation. I can say no to that, especially if that's like the funnel that they want to get into. In this situation, it's the same thing. I feel that there's, like I said before, not enough adjustment. I feel like both of them are fencing really instinctually, and that's totally fine, especially because, both fencers' actions are finding hits and their instinctive actions are working for them. But in the conversation of like, well, how do I beat this guy? Like we oftentimes have to answer questions already, like what does this guy like to do, and if he does this, what can I do, and if he does this, what will I do, right? Like in tournaments we make these observations with each other when we're watching fencing, like if I have to fight this guy, what am I looking out for? And then even within that exchange or within that bout of five, this guy likes to do this against me, what should I be doing so that I don't so that he doesn't get, his reward at the end of
mhm,
that, so that he doesn't get me in that position? How can I say no? How can I deny that from them? And this type of this fencing that we're seeing, neither person seems to be saying no. In fact, both people seem to be saying yes more often than not.
yeah,
And it's unfortunately neither one of them seem to be overtly more skilled than the other to like make a volume check of like who's just winning more exchanges. This is what I would probably say is that it kind of feels like a toss up when they get into Krieg, like who's going to win the exchange. It doesn't feel like anybody is really reliably getting the control that they need. And that's not to say that it's not effective in a competition, because you can win that way and spread out the score sheet.
mhm,
But wouldn't there be a more effective way for us to fence leading up to this? Like, couldn't we have said no as red is approaching and consistently attacking into us? Couldn't we be saying no by like hitting his hands on entry, or like we just saw, which is a great
yeah,
counter thrust and threat?
mhm,
There's always ways that we can you know more effectively fence against our opposition. And maybe here I would like to see a lot more of those adjustments being made, whether it's with his feet, going in more, going out more, taking more, hitting and prep more, just something that's not kind of colliding our blades and going to this parry posture.
Right. Right. Yeah. Excellent. Excellent advice. Um, okay. All right. So we are at about 40 minutes now. Why don't we go ahead and see the one where he is better than his opponent?
Cool. And let me put some notes in real quick so that
Sure. Yeah. I'll take two
put it
seconds.
in.
Yeah. All right. And this is the final video, the one where he describes himself as better than his opponent. This will be an interesting one. I'm interested to see what he does um, when he's given more opportunity for openings. Yeah, I think with the exchange previously here, going into like, your ability to say no and stuff, like that was kind of an instinctual cut that he made just like very quickly, and it didn't really work out for him. Like, again, this was a cut that was based on instinct, not really on, oh, I see an opening or I've created an opening and now I'm going to shoot for that opening. Just kind of
It's
throwing
also a
things.
thing of like, it's also, and not to be too nitpicky, we can go ahead and pause it here.
Sure.
My quick observation is that his fencing seems to be exactly the same as the prior two bouts. I think the same decision making is happening. I think the same actions are happening, which again is to say that he's probably just fighting off of his training, which is totally fine.
Hmm.
I think that the very first exchange that he did, he shot the point with the Shisen, like with a flunging style action that got him doubled. The second exchange, I believe, was a great barring action where he covered his opponent's initial low left threat, or his low left, his opponent's low right, got a parry riposte, and then the third exchange was a double. And for me, it's still the same thing that we're seeing. Where, like I said, he's not saying no, but this last exchange I wanted to make note of. Yes, it's also, I think, maybe a more instinctual action from that parry, but I want to make note of the ending position if you want to play through the exchange. I mean, we see that maybe it tags his arm a little bit. We can go back even more on this one, I believe, to the exchange prior. Yeah.
Sure. Let me.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think so. Or maybe, do you mind backing up even more? Yeah, yeah. So what's that exchange? Is when he throws his cut, if his opponent, if the range is wrong, or if his opponent says no after this, let's make the observation that we're like really putting ourselves out of presence after this cut, right? Like
Hmm.
we are totally cutting all the way through and our point is out of the way, which one, um, maybe not the best for our health of our wrists, developing issues. We
Yeah.
want to do this for a long time and a good time. Um, but when we talk about fighting in position, right? We're cutting two positions. When we're parrying two positions. And this is a
Hmm.
great example of we're throwing that hitter not to a position, but we're just throwing it. You know what I mean? And
Right.
now in our system of failures, if it missed and we were like thinking, oh, like transition to right ox for my cut. If we end in that right ox and that we're still able to keep our point of presence and fence, that's great. Not only are we like getting away from maybe developing bad movement patterns. In this case, something that can really tweak our wrist or affect us in the future. But also, tactically, we're just going to be a much tighter fencer in general. We'll have much more concise movements, much more consistent movements. We'll have an ability to pull our actions in case we need to. We have an ability to power our actions in case we need to as well. In this case, I'm pretty sure it looks like he doubles afterwards too, right? Even though he does get the tag hit on that right square to the arm, as it goes wide, Fencer on the left is still able to find some type of action afterwards. On
Hmm.
the afterblow or the absug. So that's to say, we don't have to necessarily change our fencing style as a whole, but even within the current status quo of his movements, we can totally find things that need to be tightened up or can be tightened up, not just vis-a-vis like, how does he move his blade, how does he move his feet, but to the effect of so that we can make better decisions, so that we can put ourselves in better positions
Hmm.
to, fence well moving forward.
Hmm. So I think just rounding out like what you're saying, just for clarity, and this is like a concept that I think I've taken from like KDF, is that our cuts are things that happen as we're transitioning through guards, right? like like if we're going from a vom tog into a long, like, oh, what has happened? There's a cut in between those two actions, right? So if we frame our fencing like in this way, we can move between like better positions of structure as opposed to just saying I'm throwing a cut and I'm going to land anywhere that it takes me. Um,
Right. Yeah, I think that it's not even like exclusively like a KDF thing. I think
mhm,
this is really just an internalization thing that we can look at, and I'll kind of propose this idea is that when we practice a system, the entire point is that it simplifies our actions or it simplifies the process of making these actions. Whether that's because it gives us a tool set and ideas to work with, like different types of cuts and different types of concepts, or maybe it categorizes things in a way that we can understand, like the Vierlieger, the Vierblasen, the Dreiwunder, the Hapstück, like all of these are essentially compartmentalization tools that allow us as practitioners to like put everything in a neat little box that we access.
mhm,
One thing that I think is important that we keep note of is we can look at something like a Zorn How or like a Shield How or a Twer How or any of these actions as a transition from point A to point B. And realistically, we can leverage the nomenclature within the system for that to be true. I can look at me throwing a Zorn or a Wrath point as going from a position like Tog and going into long point, like you said. And I think that the benefit of doing something like that, and I think we've spoken about this before, is if I ask somebody to throw a cut, there is a notion or a preconceived idea of what that entails, right?
mhm,
Maybe somebody but thinks that, oh, if I'm cutting it, it has to have like X, Y, and Z, right? It needs to be fast, it needs to be quick, it needs to be aligned on the edge. And yeah, those can totally be all true. But there's plenty of people who hear the word cut and like maybe what we just saw happened, which is like, oh, I'm like trying to hit my opponent. I'm concerned with getting to the target at while keeping the attributes that I want, like speed and power and edge alignment. I think that doesn't always lead us to the best position, especially when we look at
mhm,
really, really measured fencing where things go wrong. Because I often think that we want to be able to fence in a way that if our action fails, we're not totally having to like make um, concessions to like recover our actions. We should still be fencing with the idea of if this fails, I have an idea positionally of where I can go or what I can do. And oftentimes, by accessing this idea of we're just transitioning, we're really just going to, we're not going to foreign territory where I'm throwing a cut and then I'm out in, the chaotic realms of Krieg. I'm throwing a cut so that when I throw this cut, I end up in Ox. And if
mhm,
I'm in Ox and I hit, I'm good and I can parry from here. If it doesn't hit and I'm in Ox, I can still fence as if I'm from Ox within Krieg.
mhm.
And I think there's a really big power to consolidating your fencing tactically within this type of idea because it lets you access the system's answers more reliably than, having to kind of just pull it when it feels okay. At least that's how I see it.
Right. No, I think that that's a hugely invaluable insight and a framework to like approach fencing. I think that that's I think that that's extremely valuable for sure.
Mhm. The
Um,
alternative is if we don't have something like that, and then it's like now our sword can be in 100 different positions, and we have to kind of find a way
yeah.
to adjust 100 different times,
Hmm.
which isn't impossible. But I'd rather fence into 4 different positions of the Veer Leaguer, and then only have to worry about my responses because I'm always going to these 4 reliably. I just
Hmm.
feel like for most people, that's going to be a much easier game to like tactically wrap themselves into than like the other alternative.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I mean, it simplifies like what's happening. I mean, this I think this is kind of why, fencing is an art in that, an infinite number of like permutations can like be happening. And like what a system is it simplifies it down, it boils it down to where, we can make, a set of decisions and win easier, right? We can hold the space in our mind easier. It makes things easier. So I definitely resonate with what you're saying here. Um, let's go ahead and continue.
Cool. Let's go ahead and pause it, and then let's look at the last three exchanges. There's quite a few good things to say about the last three specifically. Yeah, we'll start at this one as the first exchange. I think this is a great example of, saying no. Like this exchange shows to me this idea that like we have an opportunity where we're moving backwards, we're kind of keeping our eyes in front of us, in front of our blade at what we should be looking at and what we should be doing. Um, I see him prepping, I see him being threatened, he backs up,
Mm-hmm.
he finds an action where he's going to be too close and he's safe to re-extend. Nice. I think this is great. I'm not too sure if he got touched there, but I think decision making wise, it seems
Yeah.
to be outside of the wheelhouse that he's been doing. And I like this adjustment. I like this idea of changing his paradigm a little bit within the exchanges so that he can find more results. Second exchange, I think it's going to be great. He's going to find himself finding a taken long point, which leads him to a great tware. Um, I'm not quite too sure if this take itself was reactionary and meant to be a hitter. Maybe it was. That's fine. Nice easy setup. Again, I
Great
think these
pass.
are the exchanges that we've been seeing throughout the entire past two videos that he excels at. Like
Mm-hmm.
working that tware how working off the extension of the blade on the initial.
Yeah, and then
And
kind
then
of
the
run.
exact same
Yeah.
action that
Run.
happened in the previous exchange, an extension or a Shisen followed by a tware. And this time his opponent is moving in and making a different reaction, maybe trying to force a pommel. Um, One thing that we can kind of make note of that is more showing the longer that at least I'm watching the footage of this individual is the frequency of the exchanges, and maybe it's one of those things where it feels like we're seeing the same type of exchanges because we're seeing so many exchanges. But I think kind of the bigger note I want to make is how long is it taking for him to conclude the exchange from when it starts? And even within these three exchanges, they're resetting. They immediately walk up into the edge of Krieg, basically into Krieg, and then they throw the action. Right.
Mm-hmm.
It's done in like less than 5 seconds, especially against a newer fencer or someone, or maybe someone that we feel like we're higher skill level on. It's okay to make these exchanges last longer, right? It's okay to secure ourselves in the taking of the blade, making sure that we're safe before we engage on the action.
Mm-hmm.
It's okay to probe and try to get information out of measure before like engaging on something. Within the very first exchange, it was a dedicated shot of the point to hit them, right? And
Mm-hmm.
now pretty much every exchange is just re-shooting the point forward to find a second intention. Um, I think that with fencing, compared to other martial arts, a huge difficulty is that, one touch and then you're done. Like a judge can call halt when they see a blade touch somebody. It doesn't necessarily matter what the quality is all the time, for like a subjective judge, but just the sheer fact that, um, you know, even if I stab them in the face and they tipped me in the hand or tipped me in the leg, that can effectively be a double, and we can both be losing that exchange, given
Mm-hmm.
a different type of rule set. It really behooves us to take our time and really try to triangulate and calculate what our opponent is trying to work towards, and then doing an answer against that or not allowing that to happen. It really is to our advantage to make these exchanges a bit more definitive and safe. And by doing so and getting to that point, we need information. And especially against someone of lower skill, or especially someone who's newer, it's really chaotic and hard to get that information sometimes. Against
Mm-hmm.
someone who's maybe more advanced, that information is maybe a bit more consistent because we're fencing from like a similar skill level or framework or a similar expectation. But in this case, when I find that Forens is consistently fencing the same way against different skill levels, to sometimes similar results, sometimes different results, maybe smaller issues getting taken advantage of against the higher skill level person than others. The thing that screams to me as like an instructor is I would totally just love to see more wide, like eyes wide open fencing, like more
Yeah.
deliberate decision making, more like let's let things develop and then like let's do things when things are right and things feel good to do. And let's not
Yeah.
maybe like try to just do the thing in the moment because it feels like where we ought to be, or where we like to be. Like we need to be able to kind of take a look at what is our fencer against me doing, and how can I counterplay against that. I think that not just as a way to win, but as a skill to have in tournaments is so valuable. The ability to be able to know what our opponent wants to do and how to beat them is a thing that differentiates really good competitors and against just people who are good at fencing in the club. It's easy to learn how to like fight somebody, go home, be like, oh, I'm watching the footage and I'm making the adjustments for the next time that we fight, and then work to that over a long period of time. It's really hard to do that in a small amount of bouts,
Yeah.
and that's a skill that we need to develop. And in this case, I would love to see that being developed more often by being more deliberately um, stingy with their defense, stingy with their offense, and just let the exchanges, breathe out a bit more before trying to close it out.
hmm Yeah, I definitely agree. Particularly like with that last bit, because I think like what I noticed here, like in these passes, is that like while he is making more points, while he is making more touches, everything like all the actions that he's making are still sort of based on instinct, right? Like I'm in this parry position, and then this like riposte is going to come because it just feels like correct, rather than a slower, more deliberate like process of decision making. And I think like we have a buddy, right, who says it's really hard to tell somebody who's winning that they're wrong, right? And it is possible in fencing to win in the wrong way. And I think that that is sort of maybe like what we're seeing here. And I would much rather like to see, especially against somebody who's new, who you have more of an opportunity to like work in like longer, more deliberate plays. Like I would like to see more of that, right? Just like with what you said, a little bit slower, a little bit more deliberate, rather than these sort of instinct based cuts that are really just made, you know, for the purpose of speed, for the purpose of making that touch, for the purpose of making that point, right? Like let's not try to like win, but let's try to win correctly, if that makes sense. Um,
Right. And I think that we can see it consistently across a lot of really good fencers or really good practitioners of almost any domain. Like the way that we have to do the thing that we do against different skill levels looks different.
mhm,
Fencing, newbies fencing each other, people who are newer who are fencing each other, it's an entirely different game that's being played as the intermediates fencing each other, which is also a pretty different game that's being played versus the highest levels, right?
mhm,
Well, of course, I'm not being. Uh, it's not different in the fact that we're not fencing. It's just like the way that we ought to be moving, or the type of movements that we're seeing, or even tactically the type of things in the pecking order seem to be rearranged quite a bit. In this case, if I'm fencing somebody of a much higher level, the types of opportunities and games that I'm playing and looks that I'm looking for change a little bit. Versus if I'm fighting somebody who maybe is completely new, I'm not playing those games against that person because maybe they don't have the experience to recognize what games we're playing. Maybe it's like not worth doing it. Maybe the easiest thing is just reach out and hit them if they give me like an opportunity to do so. Um,
mhm.
I think this is true. With that being said, I think that with all three of these videos, it just looks like we're fencing the same way against all
Yeah.
three, which to me doesn't seem like it should be the case.
Mhm,
Um, and that could be that maybe these aren't new people. Maybe they are more or less on the same skill level. We would never know at the end of the day.
mhm,
But even past that idea, like the quality that I'm getting at is that we make adjustments to the game that we play, and the game that we play is different based off who we fence. And in this case, when we're seeing three different videos of fencing different people, that game hasn't changed much at all.
mhm.
And that's just something an observation to make note of.
Yeah, for sure. So do we want to go into final notes? Would you like to watch the
Let's
last?
watch the rest of it. We can
Okay.
just watch the rest of the 53 seconds, and then we'll go from there.
Oh, and one more thing that I got to point out, man. Like, if you don't take anything at all from this video other than like work on your footwork, then that's the only thing. Work on your footwork, because this that position there, I mean, it's dangerous. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Okay, well, not bad. I mean, I enjoyed it. Not bad. Not bad.
Mhm,
Certainly seen far worse. So it's not that there's no
mhm.
potential here. There certainly is. Okay, yeah, go ahead and pop up your stream. We'll start the final notes portion of this that Brandon is going to generously show us. Jesus Christ.
Yep, few. And it's actually, Josh and I have done a few film reviews. I've done a few film reviews with a few of our fencing friends, and I like to make it a habit of, as we're reviewing film, we keep notes, right?
Hmm.
Oftentimes, when I'm going through this process with my guys, my notes are much more relegated to their opponents than them. Sometimes it's both, but I find that when we talk about fencing as an activity of fencing somebody else, it makes more sense that we look at what that somebody else is doing. In this case, since it was mostly on our one individual, I tried keeping notes mostly pertaining to that one individual. And honestly, this is a pretty consolidated sense of what we're looking at.
Hmm.
But I'll send this over so that if you want to send this over to him, that's totally
Yes,
fine.
yes.
But I wanted to make notes of a few different things in summary, and then maybe a few propositions that I have that might be like actionable steps moving forward. Um, and I'm kind of going to make this as free flowing as possible. The biggest summary notes that I want to make note of in between the similar skill level, higher skill level, and lower skill level is I think that we're doing a relatively good job with what we're working with. I think that instinctually you're moving well. I think that you have a pretty decent sense of like your distance. I think you have a decent sense of what actions you like to do. You seem to have like a type of fencing that you want to funnel towards, which I think is like shooting the point, get the creed, cut it out. Right. I
Hmm.
think that's totally, totally fine. I think that there's adjustments that we can make to make that more effective and more efficient, which is great. And that's to be said with anybody. But more importantly, I think that there's a lot of reorganization of some of the tactical games that we're playing that would be much more beneficial to either make the flow and funnel into your game more effective or to make just the act of you counter fencing somebody a bit more efficient in case that game doesn't work out. We'll always meet somebody who does their game better than us, so we need to have
Hmm.
answers, right?
Hmm.
But my summary for things is pretty simple. Mechanically, I think the footwork can have opportunities to be tightened. I think specifically your ability to move quickly forwards and backwards and explode forwards while maintaining decent platforms is the thing in question. Oftentimes, this idea of like, how much am I sacrificing the safety and the validity of my end position? How much of that am I sacrificing for the explosiveness and speed and measure of my initial assault is a really real thing. Um, my ability to throw myself as far as I can, as fast as I can, without caring about my recovery, I mean, that's going to look very different than if I have to like be really worried about setting my feet when I'm done. That's a decision that this fencer needs to make, but I would love to see them just get better at both. I'd like to see
Hmm.
them be able to move forward and explode forward in a way that if their initial action doesn't land, are they still able to comport themselves in creek without getting bowled over? And a few exchanges that we saw against both the similar and higher, and honestly, the attempt of the lower was once they got close, they were just going to cut around it or cut through their actions. They're going to like move their arms out of the way, tore off to the side, and it felt like our fencer didn't really have the opportunity or the position to work that action or counteract that action very well positionally. Inversely, if we are one to just get the first touch, we need to be tighter on that action, right? We need to be able to throw our bodies more concisely, time our hands a little bit more effectively, and then just be a little bit faster. Like if you really are going to throw away the platform afterwards, and then there's still plenty of work that we can do. But besides the point, hand position I think is a major note that I want to make mechanically. I think our hand position is a little bit too low oftentimes when we're in tog. Our hands are low. I think we're opening up shallow targets too consistently against an opponent who wants to do so. Nobody in the video really took that advantage, but that's something that I would say is really, really common, at least within my club and within our fencing scene here in the Southern Historical Fencing League, as far as like a meta that a lot of guys are gravitating towards. I think that their habit of keeping their hands relatively low on some of their shots is going to get them in trouble and has gotten them in trouble based off some of the video footage, but is also
Hmm.
just a habit I'd like to see breaking. The higher that we have our hands, more extension that we have, but also the better our cone of defense is as we're moving forward, the better chance we have of parrying. Um, weakening when we're in Krieg after that first intention, a lot of actions where we're kind of pulling our sword back so that we can get ready for things like parries or continue to attack. I think that by lowering and weakening in Krieg, we're giving our opponent a tempo to work off of. Um, Again, this is just like a movement pattern habit that I'm seeing. So pulling that back so that that's not a habit, but a decision that you make, I think would be great. This is really all encompassed by the habitual sense of their fencing. They seem to have a set amount of movements and patterns that they like to do that are really ingrained into them. So, really, what I'm asking for is maybe look at breaking some of those habits and turning them away from just habits to like conscious decisions of like, am I feeling like this is the right idea to do? Am I able to, if I am being exploited for having my hands too low, if I am getting exploited for maybe not timing my hands, my blade with my feet at the right time, am I able to like not do that if I need to? Um, that's a big thing.
Hmm.
Hand position, I said it kind of briefly. This idea of are we moving our blade first before we're moving forward? I don't think that's very true or consistent with the fencing that I've seen. That's going to be really, really important. It's going to solve a lot of issues of just not getting hit on entry. So that'd be a big thing to work towards. And then the last kind of overall thing that we can talk about before getting the propositions is tactically we're fencing the same way against pretty much everybody in different skill levels, at least based off of the footage that we saw. Fencing as a game is really about what do we need to do to beat this one person and the actions that they present to us. Um, Oftentimes we got different looks but same themes as far as what their opponents were doing to them. That oftentimes means that we need to have different types of answers or at least get out of the flow of what we're normally doing so we're not as predictable. I think that ability to make those adjustments mid bout wasn't quite there, and that's a thing that we'd like to develop. Um, and that will make the fencing just much more consistent. And especially your path to getting better, it'll be much easier to triangulate what you need to do and what you need to work on moving forward, if that's like your main kind of framework that you're working from. But let's get into propositions over here, kind of at the bottom, just so that we can round things out. Tighten up actions. How do we do that, right? I think what would be helpful is maybe kind of let's look at how we're conceptualizing your movements. Obviously, training your footwork, training your hand speed. These are all things that we can do. But for me, it would start at let's look at how we're throwing our actions, specifically with our hands, our cuts, and let's try to make them more deliberately transitions. Let's think of as I'm drilling in the club, as I'm drilling against a Pell, am I thinking of as I parry and cron and I throw the same side right tware, can I just position that as like a transition? And the way that we can test that is if I'm doing this in space, if I think of throwing this action, am I able to land with my point on line and like way not out of presence? If I'm thinking of throwing a cut from Tog at my opponent, am I able to consistently think of cutting to long point and stopping consistently? Um, there's a lot of partner drills you can do and like plastron style drills that really, really help with this. And that's neither here nor there, but I would start there is maybe re-looking at how we're viewing our movements as proliferating. The better that we get as really consolidating them within the beer league, or at least in my opinion as a KDF guy, I think that it's going to make the path of accessing techniques and accessing like multi-intention fencing a bit more efficient, a bit more effective, and more importantly, as like a teaching mechanism, it's just going to be so much easier to explain to people. At the very least, it's going to let you access a lot more of the text itself, in my eyes. Moving forward, put it in bold. We should pretty much really practice taking actions in your own training environment. If you're wanting to take close to the body, you need your hands to be a little bit higher, closer to the body, so that you're using the structure of your body to defend yourself and not reaching out and opening up actions to the arms or the hands. When you're in distance and zoofectin and we're being threatened, if there is white noise and we don't like it, it's okay to step back and say no and just get out via your feet. But if we are trying to react with our blade, we got to keep things really, really tight, or else we're going to give our opponent opportunities to fence to our hands way too easily, or like develop to like the deeper threat with like a strong thrusting action. And as we're wider, it makes that easier to do. Um, this is such a key component, right? If we can defend against the actions well, we can look to this idea that a lot of times people are so focused on the hits that they're not worried about where they end up. And this is true on all skill levels. The better that we get at defending against these actions, especially compared and levied with this idea that our opponents maybe are less concerned with their ending position, we can kind of just take a look at now all you need to do after you parry, which is kind of the hard part, is just hit them
Mm-hmm.
for free, right? As they weaken off of instinct after they go for that first intention hit, that's your chance to hit them. Just work indus of that action. Get yourself in a position where you're so comfortable with effectively parrying that feinting you is really difficult to do. Make it so that when you do parry, you're always thinking of I'm parrying in a platform that if I do need to re-extend and re-attack, I'm so comfortable to do so without having to risk like my own safety. Like this is such a big level up for everybody's fencing that I wish was, taken a bit more seriously for a lot of people, and especially based off of the type of fencing that I saw today, it would really be to your advantage to just like someone's overextending and risking themselves for attacking really dangerously, just defend it and then hit them. And then you're good, right? Don't worry about re-extending into the action and trying to hit them in time, because oftentimes structurally we're not really in the right spot. Our timing isn't usually quite right from what I saw. We're getting doubled. Even some of the decision making on what angle we should be cutting from isn't quite right.
Mm-hmm.
Just work on defending yourself in multitude of different ways, not just hanging parries, not just takes in Ox, not just takes in Kron or Tog, but also takes in Long Point and takes in Fluke as well. Moving past that, work on timing of blade to hand. This is something that you can do at home really simply. We must have our blade in front of us before advancing so that we're not getting counter thrusted. If we think of any action that we do with the longsword, it's both our sword and shield. So it is super important that as we're, especially if we're more of like someone who likes to thrust, we need to be sure that we are setting upon them with the point, with our hands at extension, really before we are looking at concluding our step, just so that we're not putting ourselves at risk of getting counter thrusted. It sucks really bad when we're fencing and that we can't answer very deliberately of is this position that I'm moving into a position that will keep me safe? If that answer is yes, that gives us at least a little bit of confidence in which we can really send the action. And like I said before, if you really want to hit and not concern yourself with like where you're ending up so that you can really charge your action, at the very least, make sure that your hands are working for you and not giving you a coin flip of am I safe or am I not? At worst, what happens is someone makes the right read and they re-extend into you, and you're moving into a thrust and getting injured. And we see it happen
Mm-hmm.
so many times. And what does that do? Is it makes you scared to fence that way,
Yeah.
and that's the type of fencing that you like to do. And if you're scared to fence that way within the 5 exchanges of that bout, it's really hard to climb your way back up if you don't have counteractive actions. And if it gets even worse and you do get injured, it would suck that you can't fence that way anymore and you have to completely abandon it because of some injury or some mental threat of like, I really don't want to do that again because it just didn't work. And not only did it not work, but it got me hurt. And that's really real too. So just to avoid that from happening, something we can work on, make sure that you're moving your blade first before you are concluding your action or even like really starting that process of the action. Does this mean that our cuts have less measure or less distance as far as like potential cutting actions? I think so. But it's going to keep you safer, right? And that's an entire conversation we can have at some other point in time.
Mm-hmm.
Last proposition that I would have is kind of the big one, and it's harder for us to practice, but I'll kind of give maybe an idea of what we can do. Is we need to focus on making adjustments mid bout, right? And like I said, our sport is chaotic, and what I mean by that is that it only takes a touch, and it doesn't have to be like someone gripping you with a cut. They can just poke you for things to be over, at least within like a tournament context. But even if these were real swords as well, there's a difference between this and boxing as far as like volume and what's what we need to look out for. It is kind of our jobs to make things as manageable as possible and control everything that we possibly can as far as giving us the best chance to win. Um, so I would like to see this idea of being a bit more eyes wide open in the process of our fencing so that we can make those adjustments and keep things manageable if possible. As I said at the end of this, these adjustments kind of require answers. And what do I mean by that? Is do we have like the knowledge of if my opponent is presenting this type of threat, this is what I should be doing. If I'm threatening my opponent and I notice that they parry in this way, do I know what I should be doing against that? And do I know what they can do if that doesn't work? Like at the start of the adjustment process, we need to know what our possibilities are. And that for me is a benefit of the text, right? The text and the sources kind of tell us what we can do and what we should be doing. If that's not your thing, and then at the very least, you need to be looking at the actions that are happening in front of you, and you need to be kind of conceptualizing your own playbook of, well, if they do this, this is what I'm going to work towards do. How do we drill them? I mean, plastron drills. Find someone in your club who you have a good relationship with that fences maybe in a way that you understand and that you know, and deliberately tell them what you're working on before you fence, so that they can feed you these ideas and you can feed them the answers to it. Something as easy as like taking your sparring environment and making it a bit more targeted is great. Watching film like we're doing now is great. Like if I show you a footage of a fencing bout, can you give me a laundry list of observations of things that are happening? Realistically, this is time in, time out. So maybe a bit more time in, but not just in fighting, but very deliberately like watching fencing and coming up with answers would be
Hmm.
my recommendation. Whether it's good fencing or bad fencing, it's up to you. But yeah, I would say that's the
Okay.
propositions I have. I know a lot of that was long-winded, but
No, but it's important. It's
I'll send this
important.
over. Yeah.
I mean, this is a nuanced thing, and this person asked for, critique, and that's certainly what he got here today for sure. And I'll be sure to
Hmm.
like send this over,
Sure.
so that he can have this, and hopefully like this will be beneficial. I think there's a lot to work from here. And I think it goes without saying, I echo every single one of these statements. And thank God we have Brandon here to break it down as eloquently as he has. Um, so, I mean, if that's all we have today, Brandon, thank you very much for coming on and helping out this individual. I hope that it helps him for sure.
Cool. Thanks
And
for bringing me on board.
yeah, yeah, absolutely, man. It was a pleasure. And thank you guys for watching. Be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe. It definitely helps the channel more than you know. And we will see you in the next one.